This is one of the most disturbing stories I've ever brought to you. A case that shattered every boundary of human decency I thought existed. We're talking about a funeral, a sacred space where families gather to grieve, to say goodbye, to find some measure of peace in their darkest hour. But on this day, that sanctuary became a battlefield. Mourners dressed in black, clutching tissues and memories, filing into a Pittsburgh church to honor a young life cut short. The pastor opens with words of comfort. Flowers line the altar. A mother prepares to bury her child. Then the unthinkable happens. Gunshots. Not outside on some distant street corner, but inside the house of God. Bullets flying past grandmothers and children. A funeral service transformed into a crime scene in seconds. Here's what haunts me about this case. This wasn't random violence. This was planned, calculated. Someone looked at a funeral announcement and saw an opportunity for revenge. They turned a community's grief into their weapon. So how does a funeral for a 20-year-old become a shooting gallery? How does a place of worship become a place of terror? And what kind of violence is so consuming that it follows victims even to their graves? Before we go any further, I want you to know this story is going to be difficult. We'll be talking about real people, mothers, daughters, innocent bystanders, whose lives were forever changed by senseless violence. If you're watching with family, you might want to consider that. But if you stay with me through this journey, I promise you'll understand something important about how violence spreads, how systems fail, and how entire communities can become trapped in cycles they never chose. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more cases like this handled with the respect they deserve. Share this video, not for the shock value, but because these stories need to be told. These victims deserve to be remembered. And wherever you are right now, whatever you're dealing with, may your families stay safe. May your sanctuaries remain sacred. Because what happened in Pittsburgh proves that nowhere is guaranteed to be safe when violence goes unchecked. To understand how bullets ended up flying in a church, we need to go back 3 months to a seemingly ordinary Tuesday night in Pittsburgh. March 14th, 2023. A Get-Go gas station on East Carson Street. The kind of place where people stop for gas, grab snacks, maybe buy lottery tickets. Nothing about this location screamed danger, but that night, it became the spark that would ignite a chain of violence ending in unthinkable tragedy. Betty Jean 8 was 51 years old, a grandmother who worked hard to provide for her family. She wasn't involved in street politics or gang conflicts. On March 14th, she was simply in the wrong place when other people's violence exploded around her. Betty had raised children, celebrated birthdays, worried about bills like the rest of us. She probably never imagined that pumping gas could cost her life, that a routine stop could put her in the crosshairs of a conflict she had nothing to do with. Jacquelyn Mehalic was just 20 years old. 20. Still figuring out who she wanted to become, still making plans for her future. Her family called her Jackie. She had dreams, friendships, inside jokes with people who loved her. Jackie wasn't a target. She wasn't involved in whatever dispute was about to unfold. She was simply a young woman whose life intersected with violence in the most random, cruel way possible. Here's how it happened, minute by minute. The tension had been building for weeks through social media posts and text messages, the modern way conflicts escalate. Street politics in Pittsburgh, like many cities, often plays out through Instagram stories and group chats before it hits the streets. By 9:47 p.m. that Tuesday night, multiple vehicles had converged on the Get-Go station. Security cameras captured the sequence of events that followed, and what they show is chilling in its speed and brutality. 9:48 p.m. The first car pulls into the station. Occupants exit, moving with purpose. 9:49 p.m. A second vehicle arrives. Text messages are still flying between phones, threats, locations, confirmations that people are in position. 9:50 p.m. Betty Jean 8 is pumping gas, completely unaware of the storm about to break around her. Jacquelyn Mehalic is nearby, probably checking her phone or thinking about getting home. 9:51 p.m. The shooting begins. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but it changed everything. Multiple shooters opened fire across the gas station parking lot. Bullets flew in every direction, some aimed, some wild, all deadly. Betty Jean 8 fell first, a grandmother whose only crime was needing gas. Jackie Mehalic tried to take cover, but there was nowhere to hide from the chaos. At 20 years old, her story ended at a gas station because other people couldn't solve their problems without violence. When the smoke cleared and the sirens faded, 2 innocent women were dead. But this wasn't the end of the violence. It was the beginning. The street code that governs conflicts in many urban areas doesn't recognize innocent bystanders. It doesn't pause for grief or allow for mourning. Instead, it demands retaliation. And retaliation demands retaliation, creating cycles that trap entire communities. Jackie Mehalic's death meant her family would need to plan a funeral, and in a world where violence follows violence, that funeral would become the next target. The investigation into the get-go shooting moved quickly. Police had surveillance footage, witness statements, and physical evidence. Arrests were made. But while the legal system ground forward at its own pace, the streets operated by different rules entirely. 3 months later, when Jackie's family gathered to say goodbye, those street rules would turn a sacred ceremony into a nightmare that no family should ever endure. When Pittsburgh police arrived at the get-go station that night, they found a war zone. Shell casings littered the parking lot like deadly confetti. Blood pooled where Betty Jean 8 and Jacquelyn Mehalic had fallen. Cars sat abandoned, their windows blown out by stray bullets. The forensic evidence told a story of absolute chaos. Investigators recovered 47 shell casings from the scene, 47 individual bullets fired in less than 30 seconds, multiple calibers, 9mm, 40 caliber, 45 ACP. This wasn't a single shooter losing control. This was coordinated violence involving multiple weapons and multiple participants. But here's where this investigation differed from many urban shootings. The evidence was everywhere. The get-go station had multiple security cameras capturing different angles of the lot. The ATM across the street recorded clear footage of vehicles arriving and fleeing. Ring doorbells from nearby homes picked up audio and partial video of the chaos. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, later said she'd never worked a case with so much digital evidence. Every angle was covered, she explained to local media. We could track these vehicles from 3 blocks away, right up to the moment of the shooting, and then follow their escape routes. The surveillance footage revealed a chilling timeline. At 9:45 p.m., text messages between the suspects showed the plan coming together in real time. Pull up to the get-go. We there. Y'all ready? The cameras showed a dark sedan arriving first, followed by a white SUV. The occupants moved with purpose. This wasn't random violence. It was an orchestrated hit that went horribly wrong when innocent people got caught in the crossfire. Frame by frame, investigators tracked each vehicle's path through the city. License plate readers, traffic cameras, and business security systems created a digital trail that led straight back to the shooters. What happened next was unusual for Pittsburgh's East Side neighborhoods, where cooperation with police investigations often runs thin due to decades of mistrust and fear of retaliation. The tip line started ringing immediately. We received over 80 calls in the first 48 hours, Detective Chen recalled. People were giving us names, addresses, even pointing us toward social media accounts where suspects were talking about the shooting. Why this level of cooperation? Betty Jean 8 and Jackie Mehalic weren't involved in street politics. They were what community members call 100% innocent. A grandmother and a young woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Residents who normally wouldn't talk to police were calling in tips. Community leaders were sharing information publicly, something almost unheard of in cases involving street violence. Even rival groups put aside differences to condemn what had happened. When you kill grandmothers at gas stations, said community activist Marcus Williams, you've crossed a line that even the streets won't tolerate. The combination of digital evidence and community cooperation led to swift arrests. Within 72 hours, Police had identified their primary suspects. Jalen Hines, 22, was arrested first. Surveillance footage clearly showed him exiting the white SUV and firing multiple rounds across the parking lot. Ballistics matched shell casings at the scene to a weapon found during a search of his residence. Hines was charged with 2 counts of homicide, aggravated assault, and weapons violations. His criminal history included previous weapons charges and associations with local street groups involved in ongoing territorial disputes. Sharon Troutman, 19, was arrested the following day. Cell phone data placed her at the scene, and witnesses identified her as the driver of the dark sedan that blocked potential escape routes for the victims. Troutman faced charges including conspiracy to commit homicide, accessory to murder, and weapons violations. Despite having no prior violent offenses, prosecutors argued her role in coordinating the attack made her equally culpable for the deaths. As detectives continued analyzing evidence, they uncovered something that chilled them. This wasn't meant to end at the get-go station. Social media messages seized during the arrests revealed ongoing threats against anyone associated with rival groups. The shooting was part of a larger conflict that had been escalating for months through online taunts, territorial disputes, and personal grudges that had spiraled completely out of control. Most disturbing was what investigators found in the days following the arrests. References to Jackie Mehalic's upcoming funeral. Text messages between associates of the suspects included phrases like, "not over," and "they gonna pay respect soon enough." The investigation that had seemed so successful, with clear evidence and solid arrests, revealed that the violence was far from finished. While Jalen Hines and Sharon Troutman sat in county jail awaiting trial, the streets were already planning the next move. And that next move would target the one place that should have been absolutely off limits. A church full of mourners saying goodbye to an innocent 20-year-old woman. 3 months had passed since Jackie Mehalic was gunned down at that gas station. 3 months of her family planning a funeral while looking over their shoulders, knowing the streets hadn't forgotten, knowing the violence wasn't finished. The Hornez family, Jackie's relatives who were organizing the service, weren't naive about street politics. They understood that in Pittsburgh's world of retaliation and revenge, even a funeral could become a target. They'd seen it happen in other cities, heard the stories whispered in community meetings. "We knew they weren't done with us," Jackie's aunt, Maria Horns, later told reporters. The threats never stopped. People were saying things online, making it clear they blamed our family for what happened to their people when they got arrested. 2 weeks before the funeral, the family did something that took incredible courage. They contacted Pittsburgh police directly. Not through lawyers or community liaisons, but with a direct, desperate plea. "We need protection at the church. We know they're planning something. Please don't let them turn Jackie's funeral into another crime scene." The request was specific, detailed, and prophetic. The family provided the exact address of New Jerusalem Baptist Church on Frankstown Avenue. They gave the date and time of the service. They even shared screenshots of social media threats they'd been receiving. "They gave us everything we needed to prevent what happened," said Detective Chen, who took the initial report. Location, timing, credible threat information. It should have been straightforward. Here's where the system failed catastrophically. The family's request for protection traveled through multiple departments: community policing, tactical units, patrol division. Each handoff created another opportunity for miscommunication, another chance for crucial details to get lost or misunderstood. Somewhere in the bureaucratic chain, someone made a fatal error. The address got jumbled. New Jerusalem Baptist Church on Frankstown Avenue became New Hope Baptist Church on Franklin Street. 2 completely different locations on opposite sides of the city. On the morning of June 23, 2023, the day of Jackie's funeral, Pittsburgh police deployed a tactical unit exactly as the family had requested. 4 officers in unmarked vehicles positioned for rapid response, ready to prevent violence at a church service. They were professional, prepared, and completely useless. While mourners began gathering at New Jerusalem Baptist Church on Frankstown Avenue at 10 a.m., the police protection sat in an empty parking lot beside New Hope Baptist Church on Franklin Street, 3 miles away. Officer James Hornezes later described the cruel irony. "We spent 2 hours watching an empty church wondering why nobody was showing up for this funeral we were supposed to be protecting. We kept checking our watches, thinking maybe the service was delayed." Picture the contrast. At New Hope Baptist on Franklin Street, 4 police officers sitting in unmarked cars, radios quiet, wondering where the mourners were. They had coffee, tactical gear, and a clear plan to prevent violence. What they didn't have was the right address. Meanwhile, at New Jerusalem Baptist on Frankstown Avenue, families dressed in black streaming into an unprotected church. Grandmothers, children, friends of Jackie's family filling the pews. The pastor preparing to deliver a eulogy for a young woman who never should have died. And somewhere in the neighborhood, other cars were circling. Cars with occupants who had no intention of paying respects or offering condolences. At 11:15 a.m., the service began. Pastor Williams opened with a prayer for Jackie's soul and comfort for her family. The first hymn started, "Amazing Grace," Jackie's favorite song. At 11:20 a.m., Officer Hornezes, still sitting 3 miles away at the wrong church, radioed dispatch. "Still no activity at our location. Should we confirm the service details?" At 11:22 a.m., the first car pulled into the parking lot of New Jerusalem Baptist Church. Not family, not friends. People with entirely different intentions. The system had failed completely, and everyone inside that church was about to pay the price. Inside New Jerusalem Baptist Church, Pastor Williams had just begun reading from Psalm 23. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." The congregation of nearly 200 mourners sat in wooden pews, some dabbing tears, others staring at Jackie's white casket adorned with pink roses, her favorite flowers. Children fidgeted in their dress clothes. Elderly women fanned themselves with funeral programs bearing Jackie's smiling photograph. This was supposed to be sacred time. A moment for healing, for remembrance, for saying goodbye to a young woman whose life was stolen by senseless violence. The first gunshot shattered the stained glass quiet like a lightning bolt. Then another, and another. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was inside the sanctuary itself. Multiple shooters had entered through the church's side doors, turning the house of God into a killing field. "Get down, get down!" someone screamed, but the words were nearly drowned out by the rapid-fire percussion of bullets being sprayed across the congregation. What happened next defied every instinct about sacred spaces and human decency. Grandmothers threw themselves over children. Mourners who had come to grieve one death now scrambled desperately to avoid joining Jackie in the grave. The wooden pews that had provided comfort now became inadequate shields. Bullet holes appeared in the church walls, in hymnals, in the portrait of Jesus hanging behind the pulpit. The air filled with gunpowder smoke and screaming. Pastor Williams, still standing at the podium, continued speaking, not his planned eulogy, but desperate prayers. "Lord, protect us. Lord, have mercy." His voice carried over the chaos, a spiritual anchor in a moment of absolute terror. The shooters weren't firing randomly. Security footage later revealed they were targeting specific sections of the church, areas where they believed rival gang members were sitting. But in a packed funeral service, precision becomes impossible. A 67-year-old woman named Dorothy Chen, Jackie's former neighbor, took a bullet in the shoulder while shielding her 8-year-old granddaughter. Marcus Thompson, 34, was hit in the leg trying to reach his elderly mother. A 16-year-old girl, the same age Jackie had been when she graduated high school, caught shrapnel in her arm. The symbolism was as devastating as the violence itself. This wasn't just another street shooting. This was the deliberate violation of humanity's most sacred boundaries, the sanctity of grief, the protection of houses of worship, the unwritten rule that you don't bring violence to funerals. The shooting lasted approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours to everyone cowering in those pews. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence returned. The shooters fled through the same side doors they'd entered, leaving behind shell casings, blood, and a congregation traumatized beyond measure. Jackie's casket remained untouched at the front of the church, a haunting reminder that even in death, she couldn't find peace from the violence that had claimed her life. The scene that greeted first responders was unlike anything they'd encountered. Yellow police tape stretched across a church entrance. Evidence markers sat beside hymn books. Blood stained the carpet where families had come to mourn. In 23 years of police work, I'd never worked a crime scene in a church during a funeral, said Detective Rivera, who was among the first officers to arrive. It violates something fundamental about how civilized people behave. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at New Hope Baptist Church, Officers Rodriguez and his team were still waiting in their unmarked vehicles when their radios exploded with emergency calls. Shots fired at New Jerusalem Baptist. Multiple victims. All units respond. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They had been protecting the wrong church while mourners died at the right one. Officer Rodriguez later described racing across the city, sirens wailing, knowing they were arriving too late to prevent a tragedy they had been specifically positioned to stop. The most powerful image from that day came after the shooting stopped and the crime scene was processed. As the investigation concluded, uniformed Pittsburgh police officers served as honorary pallbearers, carrying Jackie's casket from the blood-stained church to the waiting hearse. These same officers, different individuals, but representing the same system that had failed to protect the service, now bore the responsibility of ensuring Jackie finally reached her resting place safely. The photograph of 6 officers in dress blues carrying a white casket past bullet holes in a church wall became a symbol of institutional failure, community tragedy, and the price paid when violence is allowed to metastasize unchecked. Within 48 hours of the church shooting, police arrested Sean Davis, 21, and a 16-year-old whose identity remains protected due to his age. Both faced charges of attempted homicide, aggravated assault, and weapons violations. The arrests were swift and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming. Security cameras, witness statements, ballistics evidence. Justice moved quickly once the violence was done, but no arrest could undo what had happened. No charges could restore the sanctity that had been violated or heal the trauma inflicted on 200 innocent mourners who came to grieve and ended up fearing for their lives. In the months following these interconnected tragedies, the legal system worked to sort through the complex web of charges and evidence. Jalen Hines, the primary shooter in the Get-Go station incident, was convicted of 2 counts of homicide for the deaths of Sh0t and Jacquelyn Mehalic. He received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. However, the case against Sharon Troutman took an unexpected turn. After months of legal proceedings and examination of the evidence, charges against her were dropped. Prosecutors determined that, while she may have been present at the scene, they couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt her direct participation in the planning or execution of the shooting. Similarly, charges were dropped against Samuel Pagas, another individual initially connected to the gas station incident. The evidence, while suggestive of involvement, didn't meet the legal threshold required for conviction. For the church shooting, Sean Davis was convicted of multiple counts of attempted homicide and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. The 16-year-old co-defendant was tried in juvenile court. His sentence remains sealed due to his age at the time of the offense. Laura 8, Betty Jean's daughter, addressed the court during sentencing. "My mother was 51 years old. She was a grandmother who worked 2 jobs to help raise her grandchildren. She went to that gas station to buy milk and never came home. How do you explain that to a 7-year-old who keeps asking when grandma's coming back?" Bridget Mehalic, Jackie's mother, spoke with quiet dignity about the double tragedy her family endured. "They killed my baby girl at a gas station, then they couldn't even let us bury her in peace. 20 years old, and she never got to see 21. But somehow I have to find a way to forgive because hatred is what caused all this in the first place." These deaths weren't isolated incidents in Pittsburgh. In 2023, the city recorded 86 homicides, a number that represents not just statistics, but 86 families destroyed, 86 futures cut short, hundreds of survivors left to pick up the pieces. What makes this case unique isn't the violence itself, but how clearly it illustrates the cycle that traps entire communities. Street conflicts that start with pride and territory end up consuming grandmothers at gas stations and turning churches into crime scenes. This case exposed multiple system failures that enabled preventable tragedy. Communication breakdowns between police departments that left a funeral unprotected despite explicit warnings. Social media platforms where threats and retaliation are planned in real time with little intervention. A street code that values revenge over human life and recognizes no boundaries. Not age, not innocence, not sacred spaces. But perhaps most troubling is how normal this has become. How unsurprising it feels that violence would follow someone even to their grave. The 200 mourners who witnessed the church shooting carry invisible scars. Children who attended Jackie's funeral may never feel safe in churches again. Elderly congregants jump at sudden noises during services. The trauma ripples outward, affecting people who had nothing to do with the original conflict. "They didn't just shoot up a funeral," said Pastor Williams, who has continued serving his congregation despite his own trauma. "They shot up our faith, our sense of safety, our belief that some places should be protected from the madness outside." This is a story of a street code that turns grandmothers into casualties and transforms houses of worship into battlegrounds. It's about how violence, once unleashed, recognizes no boundaries and respects no sanctuary. Betty Jean Sh0t and Jacquelyn Mehalic didn't die because they were involved in street politics. They died because other people's conflicts consumed everything in their path. Their stories remind us that there are no isolated incidents of violence, only interconnected tragedies that destroy far more lives than the immediate victims. To the families still grieving, still healing, still wondering why their loved ones had to die, your stories matter. Your losses weren't meaningless statistics. Betty Jean and Jackie deserved better from all of us. Better protection, better conflict resolution, better recognition that every life has value. And to everyone watching, this could happen anywhere. Violence doesn't respect zip codes or economic boundaries. The only protection we have is our commitment to breaking these cycles before they claim more innocent lives. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult story. Please take care of yourselves and each other.